Hi everyone, now when you're a beginner to smartphone filmmaking, it can feel like a real minefield when you're getting into your first smartphone filmmaking app. Trying to understand the settings and how they affect your image is a real difficult task. But today I'm going to show you the 5 key settings that you need to nail before hitting record. And in doing so, I'm going to show you what they are, how they affect your image, and also how to work with them to the best of your ability. Let's get into it. We've got a number and ISO at the top of this dial. Now we can see this image is a little bit overexposed, so if we raise the number, make it higher, you'll see that it's getting more and more blown out, more and more overexposed, and you can get this number on MCPRO Pro camera at least, all the way up to 3168, which of course ruins the shot. If I put my hand in front of it, you can see that everything is completely and entirely blown out, not usable at all. Even if we bring it quite low, let's say bring it to 200, it still doesn't look quite right. It just looks a bit pale, it looks overexposed still, and it just doesn't look professional. You can see in the top right hand side that there's more and more noise, and the top left as well, being introduced to the image. That's where the noise that's being hidden normally by having an ISO as low as you want, you're actually revealing more of that noise as you bring up the ISO. So you want to keep the ISO number as low as humanly possible on your app, which usually is around 33, 32. It is on Filmic Pro as well, and that gives you a clean image. And that's why ISO is one of the most important settings on any smartphone filmmaking app, and it's important that you nail it before you hit record. Now, something I've seen in short films that have been sent to me in particular is the white balance isn't always correct and locked in. Now, if I press on the white balance in the top right here, you can see we've got tint, which we're going to ignore, we don't really need that, and temp on the left hand side of tint there. It's currently at 4566, so that's Kelvin, that's the color temperature Kelvin. And what that means is, as we move this, as it's currently on auto white balance, and we can see as we raise the camera higher and higher into the brighter parts of the screen, that temperature of the color temperature in white balance is going to increase as well. And it's going to make things look a bit more vivid, more colorful, and the correct color palette to what I'm seeing right now. And that's exactly what we want. So how do we fix this? Well, if you're outdoors and it's bright, the color temperature you'll want to use for your white temperature is 56,000 Kelvin. So you can move this dial here, bring it up, 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 and we're pretty much bang on 5600 Kelvin. Now you can see here the colouring is much more accurate to what I'm actually seeing myself. So what we want to do is keep that. So we're going to have that locked. So once we get the right colour temperature, I want to lock it. And now when I move the camera and I tilt it up and down, that colouring stays exactly the same because the white balance is perfectly balanced and it's locked in. So make sure your white balance is perfectly locked, and that will go a long way to giving you a much more professional shot. For me personally, as I say, I would always unlock it. If it's daylight, fix it to 5600 Kelvin, then have it locked. That way you're going to get consistent colouring in your image no matter where you move your camera. Now we move on to focus. Focus, of course, is imperative to getting right for a nice, clean, professional looking image. So right now, if we go to the focus tool here, we currently have manual focus. Now this is really good if you've got something that's static, like this flower here, or you want to move it further back to something else. Now the focus wheel is great for getting something in a shallow depth of field that's close to the lens here, or moving it further back to something that's further into the deep depth of field. So manual focus, if I use this dial on the right hand side and move it down on MCPRO Pro camera, this may be different slightly on your app. Get that to a deep depth of field, move that to a shallow depth of field. And if you've got something or someone that is moving away from camera or to camera, you can do this as well. And you've got auto focus pulls here as well, which you can use in MCPRO Pro camera, which is a really nice tool. If we go to settings, we can see here we've got autofocus on, which is AF. So if I tap the screen, we've now got a white reticule. Autofocus means that wherever I leave it, it will go gold or yellow and it will lock. As such, you don't want to use this all the time. Maybe just put it onto something that you want the focus on, leave it, let it capture that focus, and you can leave it before you hit record and it's set to where you want it. The next option, if we go into the settings, is autofocus continuous. So if we press on that, wherever we leave this, it's going to be on autofocus. It won't lock, and that means if we want to move the camera, we can do that as well. Whatever I point the camera at, it will stay in focus. So autofocus is good for running gun situations, maybe you're vlogging, something like that. and you can get really nice shots, even in depth of field that's far away. So if you've got a landscape situation, you're looking at mountains and distance, you can use autofocus, just point it, direct it at the furthest mountain or hillside, and you'll get a really nice shot. And you've also got the option on Cinema P3 Pro camera to do face detection, so you can stand in front of the camera, that'll keep you in focus as long as your face is clear in the image. If you feel you're getting a lot of value out of this video, guys, then do hit that subscribe button and like button. It really helps this channel grow and shows me that people are enjoying this kind of content. Now let's look at exposure. Now right now I have it on spot. So when we select spot, this is going to give us the typical kind of reticule that you'd get from Filmic Pro, Beastcam, MCPRO 24 FPS, all of those kind of apps. And with the exposure reticule, wherever you move that reticule, that's where it's going to be exposing the light correctly for. So it's really important to get this exactly where you want it. So for example, if I move the reticule from the sun to the fence on the shadow side, that makes it lighter, but it doesn't compensate for the sun here. Back and forth, it's selecting what area of your image you want to correctly expose for. So that's not really any good if you want to create professional looking footage on your phone. And even if you lock the exposure, you're either going to have one that's overexposed or underexposed. You're not going to be able to correctly expose for both very bright areas of the screen and very dark areas of the screen. Indoors, you pump more light into an area to make it more bright inside, and then you have correct exposure for outside, etc. Now the accessory you want to use to keep your exposure in control when outdoors is an ND filter. So this is a Moondog Labs ND filter, and they're essentially sunglasses for your phone. So if I put this over the lens, and if I point this up to the sky, what is currently, if I correct the focus, overexposed will now be correctly exposed. And that is one way, or the main way I should say, when you're outdoors, to get the correct exposure as well, because you want to get that exposure right under control, which will lead me to my next setting that will lead on from ND filters. Now if you go to the bottom left of the image, we can find some of the settings that are really important for filmmaking, and that of course is your frames per second, which you can see in the middle of these three categories. You've got resolution on the left hand side, frames per second in the middle, and what colour bit you are using on the right hand side. Now, because I'm in the UK and it's best to use 25 frames per second rather than 24 because of the lighting frequencies and the energy frequencies, because you can cause a ripple effect, I use 25 frames per second. So let's make sure that's selected. And we want to double that into our shutter speed. So if you go into shutter speed on the right hand side, SS, we're going to go up to 180. So it's the 180 degree shutter speed rule, which means doubling your frames per second into your shutter speed. And you can see in the top right, our shutter speed of the bar here is now at 1/50. So you've got that double number 50, doubling your frames per second. And what that does is it gives you motion blur. So now getting more sunlight, which we can see is overexposing, we're going to put the ND filter on. So now this has allowed us to keep that control of the exposure, allowed us to keep control of our shutter speed, our frames per second, and now we doubled it, we're going to get cinematic motion blur. So if I go like this, you're going to get really nice motion blur. However, if I press stop and I mess up the shutter speed a lot, and then keep the frames per second as it is, because it's not doubling the frames per second, we're now not going to get very good motion blur. It's going to be a little bit jittery, and it might feel like a slight difference, but when you're watching a whole film like this, it makes a huge difference. So make sure you get your frames per second, double that number into your shutter speed, and you're going to get cinematic motion blur. That is one of the staples of professional smartphone filmmaking, and make sure that setting is correct before you hit record. Now it's time for a recap. Step 1. Make sure your ISO, which represents the brightness of your image, is as low as possible to give you the cleanest image. Step 2. Make sure whatever focus tool you're using that you set the focus again for every take. Step 3. Make sure that your white balance is locked. This will give you consistent colouring and avoid the changes in your image. Step 4. Regardless of the frames per second that you're using, make sure you double that number into your shutter speed. So for example, 25 frames per second, you'd be using a 1/50 shutter speed, etc, etc. So this is called the 180 degree rule. Step 5. When you're using your exposure reticules, make sure that reticule is over the area you want perfectly exposed. If you're outdoors, then an ND filter is going to be your best friend to keep that shutter speed nice and low to get that cinematic motion blur. Now if you've enjoyed this video everyone, then I highly recommend you check out my Cinema P3 Pro camera app tutorial right here, right now. I'll see you on the next one, take care, bye bye.